The idea of the Masterclass is something that we put in place a couple of years ago. And it's an initiative really of different schools and faculties, and then more recently, since we established Brighton Doctoral College, of the Doctoral College. And the concept of the Masterclass is to bring an expert in, a world expert who's done a piece of work that's been extremely influential, or has a method or a theory or a particular concept that is of relevance to people across a range of different areas. So we might have environmental scientists, sports studies people, business faculty, practicing artists in the room, research students from the different doctoral centres of the university, and they will have read selected readings, 3 or 4 chapters or articles by the person, and then they will spend all day. A couple of years ago we had Professor Hans Ulrich Gumbrecht from Stanford University, a theorist of what is called cultural presence, and last year we had Professor George Ritzer again from the States, who has written the hugely influential book, The McDonaldization of Society. And the people in the room who had access to thinkers on this scale have shown that the great benefits in their work and given them a great deal of confidence, particularly arguing the justification for their method and their methodology in their theses. This year we're privileged to have Dr. Etienne Wenger, whose books have had extraordinary range of citations across business, education, organisations, in different spheres of professional practice, nursing, and you can carry on with a long list of areas where people have picked up Etienne's concept, particularly of the community of practice, which allows people also to look at learning in their organisations and in the way in which they want to develop their organisation in new ways and often collective ways. So the concept of the Masterclass is for people, committed graduate students who are launched on their studies, to really think about particular concepts and theories that may help them take their justification, if you like, and their rationale for the study onto a new level.
I'm Ronald Davidson, Ron, to my friends and everyone. I'm with the business school, Brighton Business School division of the Doctoral College, and I'm doing a PhD, looking at a PhD in the governance and management of innovation in private finance initiatives. And I noticed that you're talking about your arts, I'm business, and there are other faculties involved with this. It's just reflecting the multidisciplinary nature that this university is trying to foster. I previously studied with this university about 10 or 12 years ago, and I did a master's in change management. And that experience was so rewarding that I really wanted to come back and do some more work at a higher level, which this is. If someone had said 10 years ago when I was doing this kind of work, because I read a number of his papers, that I would ever meet him, I wouldn't have believed it. So this is an incredible opportunity. It's really quite wonderful.
So what I'm doing for my PhD is I'm looking at higher education, specifically video game higher education, second year BA students. And I'm looking at how attitudes towards the creation of fine art or games as art could affect higher education, basically, and how they go about making games and that kind of thing. And that's, like I said, that's situated over in Brighton. I think the point of this is that the industry and video games education are very intimately linked. One influences the other, basically, very strongly. Methodologically speaking, my plan is to try and understand how students, what their sort of design attitudes are towards making games, and the kind of things that they plan on making and their sort of aspirations as games designers and that sort of thing. And the way I'm going to go about doing this is I'm going to create a curriculum intervention where I get students to make art games, or games which are sort of based on principles of making art. within their course, and then I'm going to look at the designs and ask them about why they made what they made and how they interpret what it means for fine art to influence their practices and that kind of thing. I expect to get out of this masterclass probably just to look. I mean, this is going to be quite a vanilla answer, really, but you know, I think his theories do have the opportunity to be sort of broadly applied. I expect to basically look at what I'm currently doing with students and think about games courses as a community of practice, you know, and then I want to sort of see how that could cross over, or how that could influence how I look at their community, and therefore how my effect, what I do, could affect them, essentially. So.
Well, my PhD is on open source organizations and how open source organizations coordinate their different activities. Traditionally, what we've seen is that open source projects only consist of one community of programmers. Now what we're seeing is that the projects are actually composed of different communities that contribute to the project in different ways. So my PhD is trying to understand how all of these communities are coordinated between each other from a central group of project leaders. I'm using a mixed method. I'm using two methods. The first one is social network analysis, and social network analysis is normally used to understand how these communities and how people in these communities interact and who they communicate with. But that only tells me so much, because with the social network analysis, you can only really measure what you can see, and there are many other activities that is not being recorded. And that's why I'm also using interviews, and I'm interviewing the project leaders to see how they do things behind the scene. My expectations of the masterclass is that I get to learn how other people have used communities of practice in their own research, and what Etienne himself makes of that use, because the way that I've seen it so far has only been applied to online communities and open source communities. So I'd be very interested to see how it's been applied to other areas of research and what Etienne himself makes of it.
The part of the Doctoral College that I belong to is the School of Computing, Engineering and Mathematics. Okay, my topic area is on research collaborations, whereby I'm looking at the process of collaborative research in Kenya. So I'm looking at the kind of activities that researchers are involved in their day-to-day practices, the kind of challenges, hurdles they face, and how they use technology to support their collaborations. I'm employing mixed methods, that is both qualitative and quantitative. So I've already done I've already collected data, of which I started as an online survey. But the response to the online survey was not too good, so I actually had to do a lot of legwork, that is hand-delivered questionnaires, which gave me quite a good response, of which the quantitative survey is supported with interviews, that is interviews as the support data. Considering that I'm looking at collaborative research, actually the research community are a kind of community of practice. So I'm expecting to learn a lot in terms of the processes of learning within communities of practice, which is very applicable to the kind of research that I'm doing. So maybe there are forms of engagement, and you know, how the kind of organization that is within communities of practice, that is whether it's maybe hierarchical or horizontal, and how it applies into my case, and the issues that come up with the kind of organizations that we are talking about, like for example how status differences and all that will affect the creation and the circulation of knowledge within the research community.
My PhD title is Arts, Relocalism and the City. I'm looking at grassroots, arts-led urban interventions and the effect that they have on the people that are involved in them. So the artists and the community members that are involved in improving something in their urban landscape. And what does that do? Does that make them feel, does it strengthen a sense of community? Does it create a sense of community? Does it help them, or do they feel more connected to their place, their neighbours, Anything from, they might say, okay, there's a bit of land at the end of there's a fair bit of land on our road here, let's turn that into a social space, or let's turn that into a garden. That could be one type of intervention. There's other ones which are sort of more sort of temporary nature in a way. There's sort of the communities that got together and just said, right, let's build a theatre. There was a community in Southwark in London that did that. And there's a theatre that stood on this land for about 6 months and then it went down again. And there's other ones which are more sort of longer term, and sort of people that are looking at a whole street, a street that might have a particular instance of crime or drug use or something like that. And they sort of turn to the arts, or sort of art-led sort of projects to try and turn that place around. So that could be projects that, they would last 5-10 years, something like that. I didn't really have really firm expectations of this. It was a great opportunity to be close to somebody who was obviously, how shall I put this? Kind of at the centre of this theory, and that's a great opportunity.
Theory of communities of practice.
Communities of practice and of learning and how people learn. And I think what I realised, certainly after going to the lecture yesterday, is that the people involved in the projects that I'll be going out to case study are kind of going on their own learning journey. They may not realise that at the beginning, or maybe even at the end, but it was interesting to help me frame what happens, what is the process of change that happens for these people in a project, and could that be a learning process for them. So actually coming into the masterclass today, I kind of want to interrogate that a little bit further and see if that is something which I could apply to my research when I go out in the field. Well, it kind of works at two levels though, because one of the things which these projects do, they're kind of co-produced. So an artist or an architect might be in working with a community, but they would never say that they were the expert in everything to do with that project. They're the expert in being the artist or in being the architect, but the community the expert in being the communities. So it's a kind of co-produced space really in sort of generating the work within the projects. And Etienne's sort of thinking around how you can sort of plug into different things and then bring them together, or run a theory through another in that way, and sort of playing with stuff like that, I was really intrigued by. But yes, actually sort of the idea of how somebody is on a journey of becoming, and that's something which I've seen in my past professional work in this area, that there is a sort of a process of, there's a sort of a realisation or a self-awareness process that people will go through when they're engaging in built environment projects. And they'll sort of come out the other side of it knowing something more about themselves and knowing more about their place and their neighbours, their community. It has made me though actually quite focus in on some quite specific issues, going into choosing case studies and going into beginning research. And primarily it's the case studies I'm looking at, the people involved in the projects. Are they going through a learning process? Is it for them a process of becoming, as he was talking about?
But if it isn't, is that a problem for you now?
No, it's not necessarily a problem, but it's interesting to look at people at the beginning of a process and then at the end of one, and is that a learning process that happens in between? So I think that might inform some of the questions that I have in interviews with people when I'm out doing research in the field. But then kind of stepping to one side of that, or maybe stepping back from that a bit. Practitioners that go in to work in these urban community contexts, they're quite different from other practitioners in the arts. And so it's made me wonder, and getting my theoretical base, tighter, honing that in, it's made me wonder, am I actually observing a beginning of a community of practice, of people that work in co-production with communities in these urban settings? Is that a new group of a new sector coming together, a new way of working come together? Is that a new community of practice? And I think one of the benefits of hearing him in the lecture yesterday and then actually getting to see him and talk to him in the masterclass today was, rather than in a way a flat reading of text in a book, I can see how he's really applied it to situations our talk together this afternoon, looking at our own research projects, looking at how his learning could be applied across those as well, has helped me go, actually, how can I really apply this to mine? So it's brought it alive a bit more for me, actually, yeah, and made it more of a tangible thing. It's not just a concept or a theory that I need to intellectually grapple with. There's actually something quite practical that I could take into the field with this.
Well, my original expectation was that I was going to see how other people have used the concept or applied the concept of communities of practice. And that is one of the things that I did get to see, which was very interesting, and the different settings that people were using in their own research, which is completely different from mine. But so far, I've only really read the literature of communities of practice on user innovation, but people were also looking into communities of practice in other fields and in other industries like education and finance, I think it was, in the Middle East. So that was very, very interesting. It wasn't a surprise, but it was a revelation, and because again, they were picking up different parts of the theory or different parts of the concept, or emphasizing different parts of the concept that I hadn't done before, that I didn't pay enough attention. So I think as a whole in the group, because we were able to discuss different parts of it, I came out with a better understanding of what communities of practice is and what communities of practice is not. In relation to my own research, it has made me rethink on how I use the concept of communities of practice. Because originally I was using communities of practice as a way to describe a community or a social structure, the way that a group is organized. However, what I've learned now is that communities of practice is not so much a social structure, but it is a social setting that facilitates learning with people that follow the same practice. So instead of using it to describe a social group, it should really be used to describe something that is happening inside a context. I think I will be writing about the things that I've learned here and in my thesis, particularly on describing what happens inside the user communities that I'm studying. So yes, I think it's very applicable to my own thesis.
The masterclass gave me, some good confidence that some of the analysis I'm embarking on is on the right lines. But it's given me a better structure in which to, and a better expression of that structure in order to continue the analysis of the data I'm gathering. But the other big breakthrough for me is that it's indicated that there's an opportunity for further work. The opportunity for further work has arisen out of the fact that of the communities of people I'm looking at, they have dissimilar backgrounds, and those backgrounds are inhibiting their ability to talk to one another. So the opportunity is to do some action research that may help them overcome these problems. It helps me identify the communities, and being able to identify the communities, find the boundaries of those communities, then would enable me to talk to them in a different way. It's not something I was expecting to do in the course of this work, but that's one of the benefits, of course, and that's the way research changes. As you learn more, it changes how you see things, and as you learn more, how there are some very interesting aspects of doing research generally, that you're kind of telling a story, and that you want to illustrate your work with specific cases, and structures such as Etienne's communities of practice can help you form these and formulate them and structure your approach into it. And that, I think, is perhaps if you can generalize that, then that's a very helpful way forward in one's research. I thought it was a great afternoon and a great morning. It was structured in two slightly different ways. In the morning it was general talking through all of these sorts of issues that face us, and particularly with his theory. In the afternoon it was us as individuals saying, this is the research I'm doing, here's where I am, here are the problems I may or may not have. And then we all chipped in, particularly with Etienne's help. in discussing those and offering some guidance and advice. When I get into the private organisations, I think I'll probably find it even more useful, because councils are fairly compact in their project management, not very large teams, whereas the private organisations will have commercial and the contracting organisation that's supporting them as well.
His work and the sort of theories that he's put forward was something I hadn't really heard of a great deal before this, so I didn't really go into it with any particular expectations of what they were or how they would apply. So it was quite interesting to, what ended up happening was, I listened to various terms and ideas and inevitably end up viewing what I was doing in those terms with those ideas. And I think it has been very helpful for providing, more context or a different perspective. Because before I was perhaps looking at my project in terms of going in, as a research into an area, whereas now I sort of think, well, maybe it's more like, I'm sort of overlapping communities of practice. It's helpful to have, whether or not I go away and directly apply, with citations, theories or whatnot from today is another thing, but I think it is incredibly useful to hear because it does help you, I will be thinking of it, it will be there in my mind when I go into field work and I look at it and go, well, what about this perspective?
I feel that I understand the issue about communities of practice in a better way, because the view that I had of a community of practice is not the kind of view that I have at the end of the day. Because what I understand now is that a community of practice is about the engagements, the interactions between people. It's not just about looking at accomplishing a task, but it's about the kind of interactions and what they mean to the people in that community. Because I'm looking at research collaborations, I find that many of the research collaborations are actually people who come together to form a community of practice because they have these common interests, they have issues that they need to solve. So I believe that my understanding of communities of practice is very relevant now to the kind of issues that I'm dealing with, that is in my own work, that is looking at how people make relationships, how the knowledge creation process, how they make those relationships and make them last so as to be able to engage continuously in that knowledge production process. And later, even after the PhD, because I'm an academic and I'm going back to the field where we are in the process of producing knowledge, so definitely it's very relevant to the issues that I'll be dealing with later. We had some very lively discussions, these issues that are affecting us, all of us within our research. Like I had a discussion and all this feedback from the other students, from Dr. Wenger himself. So I feel I really had so much to gain from this masterclass.
It was interesting because even though it was a diverse group coming from different places, their ability to engage with each other was actually quite surprising, because, well, in the first half, the focus was very much on the theory and discussing it, and they were able to relate to each other's questions really well. But in the second half, then we focused on different students' problems, and then they started to engage with each other. So it was really not just me commenting, but really the whole group. So for them, I guess, to take a social learning perspective on their very varied kind of circumstances and situations was a good way to find common ground. I think for many of them it was like a way to frame their questions and to frame their research that would give a direction to their data collection, or to give a direction to how they looked at some data that they had already collected. The ones that I spoke with felt that it helped them kind of focus the way that they looked at the situation or at the data, to start talking about it as a place where social learning is configuring how people make sense of the situation.
Well, thanks very much, and for coming to Brighton again. And
Yeah.
do you like the building, the Chetland building?
This is an amazing building. Very nice. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Thanks a lot.
Okay, thank you.